My name is Madeline. I'm 34 years old. I'm a financial technology engineer living and working in Chicago. But just a few months ago on Thanksgiving night, I was disowned by the very person who gave me life, right in front of a fully packed dinner table. He pointed straight at my face and shouted, "From now on, you are no longer my daughter. Get out of my house." The entire table went silent. Scott, my younger brother, looked down and smirked. My mom turned her head away, pretending she hadn't heard a thing. I stood up, pulled the house key from my pocket, and walked out of the house that I had been paying the monthly mortgage on for the past 8 years. Exactly 12 hours later, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Police cars, bank officers, and insurance company reps all lined up outside my parents' front door. The home security system kept blaring. Their car was towed. Bank accounts frozen. A neighbor whispered, "What's going on? Did someone break in?" Well, there was no break-in. They had just been abandoned by their own daughter. Have you ever been rejected by your own family, even after everything you've done for them? Have you ever given up your youth, your finances, your strength, just hoping to be acknowledged for once, only to be cast aside like a stranger? If you've ever been in a situation like mine, leave a comment. Hit like and subscribe so I have the strength to share the rest of what happened. Because this story isn't just about pushing back, it's about breaking free. And I'm going to tell you everything, from beginning to end. I was born and raised in a small town in Ohio, where everybody knew each other, the houses stood close together, and Sunday morning church services were practically mandatory. My family lived in a pale blue, gabled house at the end of a cul-de-sac, lined with crimson maple trees every fall. I was the oldest of 2 children, 5 years older than my brother Scott. From the time he was in a stroller, Scott was the center of attention. Mom always called him the light of my life. Dad would drop his gardening tools the moment Scott laughed, just to run over and cuddle him. I was a child too, needing affection just like him. But any tenderness I received always came with a condition. Be good, get straight A's, and take care of your brother. I was good. I studied hard. I learned to sacrifice. But no matter how much effort I put in, I always came second to the praise reserved for Scott. The year I won a full academic scholarship to middle school, a rare achievement in our rural school, Mom just nodded and said, "That's good. Keep it up." That same year, Scott got a warning for skipping class 3 times in a row, and yet Dad rewarded him with a brand new video game console. I remember that dinner. I brought up my award. Dad turned to me and said, "Doesn't matter how much a girl studies. Your brother, though, he learned to park his bike on the sidewalk today. That's real progress." I don't blame Scott. He was just a kid raised on misdirected expectations and indulgence. But over time I learned to go quiet. My awards, writing medals, and test scores got tucked away in a desk drawer because I knew no one would ask to see them. When Scott was in 3rd grade, he earned his first C on a math test. Mom stuck it on the fridge with a bear-shaped magnet like it was a trophy. She beamed with pride, telling the neighbors, "He's not good at math, but at least he tried." At the time, I was in 8th grade and had just won 2nd place in a statewide essay competition on environmental sustainability. Mom never even asked what the award was about. She just reminded me to keep the noise down. Scott needed to focus on his homework. I got used to the lack of praise. But I never got used to being invisible in my own home. One year, my birthday fell on the same day as Scott's school soccer tournament. The whole family, Dad, Mom, even Grandma, went to the stadium to cheer him on. I sat alone in our kitchen, eating a single cupcake I had bought myself from the supermarket. A flimsy candle flickered on top. No one sang me happy birthday. I had bought that cupcake using tips I earned from washing dishes on the weekend. When they finally got home, sweat and dirt still clinging to their shoes, Mom hugged Scott and said, "Thank you for making me proud." I cleaned up their dishes and went to bed in silence. All those years I kept doing what was right. I helped Mom with meals, kept the house in order, never asked for anything. When my parents fought over money, I was the one who took Scott out of the house so he wouldn't hear the screaming or the sounds of things breaking. When Scott got pulled over for biking without a helmet, I was the one who wrote the apology letter to the town sheriff, because my parents didn't. But no matter how many burdens I took on, Scott was always the one who got the hugs, the head pats, the praise. I was left with nothing more than, "You're the big sister. You should know better." Scott was never held accountable for anything. When he was 17, he crashed Dad's car while skipping school. Dad quietly paid for the repairs and said, "He's young. He deserves a second chance." I asked him, "What about me? I've never broken any rule. Doesn't that deserve recognition?" Dad frowned and said curtly, "You're different. You're stronger. You can handle it." That sentence burned itself into my memory. The way they believed I'd always endure, always manage, always be the bigger person, and never fall apart. They called it pride. But not once did they ask if I was tired. I still remember when Scott got his driver's license. Mom ordered a custom cake shaped like a car, rented out the town diner, and invited the entire extended family to celebrate. I was in my sophomore year of college, deep into finals. I called to congratulate him. Mom said, her voice bubbling with excitement, "Wish you were here." Everyone's saying Scott's so impressive, born to lead. Me. I had been awake for 3 straight nights finishing my project, slurping instant noodles in my tiny Chicago apartment, phone wedged between my shoulder and cheek, still typing out a financial model. I used to believe maybe they just didn't notice my efforts. Maybe they were too busy or never learned how to show affection. But the older I got, the more weight I carried, the clearer it became they did notice. They just chose not to see it. Because to them, I never needed to be prioritized. And Scott, no matter what he did, no matter how many times he failed, was always seen as someone worth giving one more chance. I wonder, in other families, has anyone else felt this way? Like your purpose is to serve as the backdrop for someone else to shine? Like you carry the weight of everything, yet are never allowed to be vulnerable? I stayed silent through all those years. But that Thanksgiving night when my father pointed at me and told me I was no longer his daughter, that was the moment they finally heard me be silent, and then act. And from that moment on, nothing was ever the same again. When I was 18, my dad, Henry, lost his job at the car assembly plant where he had worked for over 20 years. The entire town was shaken by the biggest layoff since the financial crisis. He came home with vacant eyes, hung up his work jacket, and sat motionless in the living room chair for hours. My mom, Linda, had never held a full-time job. She picked up shifts at the deli counter in the local Safeway, sometimes helped out at a nearby bakery. With those modest wages, we couldn't cover the mortgage, the electricity, or even gas. And I was just months away from starting college that fall. I once dreamed of a peaceful send-off, packing my bags into new suitcases, my parents seeing me off with pride in their eyes. Instead, I had to find my own scholarships, sign my own student loans, and juggle 3 part-time jobs at once. Mornings, I worked at a pastry shop near campus. Afternoons, I manned the front desk at the library. At night, I did data entry for a small market research company. Some weeks, I only slept 4 hours a night. My body felt like it was giving up, but my spirit refused to. I had to keep going. Because I knew no one was coming to save me. I didn't resent Dad for losing his job, and I didn't blame Mom for not being able to help more. But a few years later, when it was Scott's turn to go to college, somehow they scraped together the funds for him to attend an expensive private school. Mom even took out a bank loan in her name to cover his first semester tuition. I asked her, "Where did the money come from?" She replied, "I couldn't let your brother miss out. You've always been independent." And I was. I signed every loan. I worked till dawn. I studied until I passed out in the library. But every time I came home to visit, I was the one clearing dishes, lifting boxes, cooking dinner. Scott just sat with his arms folded and was praised for being low maintenance. After graduating with honors in financial systems, I applied to over 40 companies before landing a job at a firm in Chicago as a data analyst. The starting pay wasn't huge, but it was a solid step. I rented a small apartment in the suburbs, close enough to walk to the train, quiet enough to work from home on weekends. Within 2 months of starting that job, my parents began calling more often. At first, the calls were friendly. Mom would chat about the Ohio weather, about how Scott was preparing to retake Intro to Economics for the 3rd time, about how Grandma's arthritis was acting up. Then came the sighs. The hints. Your father's tired. Nobody wants to hire someone his age. The grocery store cut one of my shifts. Not sure how we'll cover the electric bill next week. I listened to those words in silence. And then I started sending money. At first it was a one-time payment, $300, then $500. Later it became monthly. I told myself I was helping them through a rough patch. But that rough patch dragged on with no end in sight. When I got promoted, I increased the amount I sent. When I received my first bonus, I used it to cover a mortgage payment they were behind on. Then Mom texted, "If you can help a little with the car insurance, your dad won't be hounded so much." Some more. After a year, I realized I was paying nearly $2,000 a month for expenses under their name. Yet no one ever asked if I was getting by or saving anything at all. Scott was chasing his startup dream. He dropped out of college in his junior year and announced he was launching a food truck-style coffee chain. The family threw a small party. My father proudly told everyone, "My son's going to do something big. He's got the mind of a real entrepreneur." That coffee chain never had a single truck. Scott said he was short on funding. A few months later, he switched to importing fitness equipment. That failed too. Then came cryptocurrency. My parents lost more than $12,000 of their retirement savings because Scott convinced them, opportunity knocks fast. Meanwhile, I continued to pay for electricity, health insurance, internet, even roof repairs after a winter storm. At family dinners, when my parents proudly told relatives that Scott is planning to open his own gym, I quietly picked at my plate, listening to praise that never pointed my way. One evening, I called home. Mom picked up. I said, "Mom, I'm thinking about buying a small house in Chicago. Nothing fancy, but I think it's time to settle down." There was a pause on the other end, then she sighed. "But if you buy a house, will you still be able to help the family?" I didn't respond right away. Inside me was a tangled knot of duty and dignity. I had the right to build a life of my own. But I couldn't walk away from them, not yet, or so I thought. Then one day I happened to open my year-end bank summary. Total sent to my family, nearly $28,000. Just about the down payment for a modest condo. I sat frozen, staring at those numbers as if they were waves crashing against my chest. And just then my phone rang. It was Scott. "Can you spot me $5,000? I'm about to close a big deal. Just short on operating cash." I gave a faint laugh, unsure who it was for. And I sent the money. But this time my heart wasn't calm. I wasn't quietly hoping for a thank you. I knew one would never come. Because to them I was someone who could carry the burden, so I should. No one ever thought maybe I needed rest too. Or even to be seen. 8 years passed and I quietly became the financial engine for a family I no longer felt part of. Every morning in my 2-bedroom apartment in Chicago, I made coffee, checked my budget sheet, and transferred money to my parents' account in Ohio. Mortgage for the house in the old town, $800 per month. Electricity, water, trash, around $400. Dad's health insurance, $180. Car insurance, inspection, HVAC repairs every winter. I paid without question. Some months I even added a just-in-case fund because Mom said, "Lucky's sick." The vet charged a lot. I've never owned a pet, but I still sent the money. The numbers kept stacking. By the 8th year, I sat alone with the spreadsheet. I had spent nearly $200,000 on people who never acknowledged that I was holding up the entire family. And during all that time, not one relative knew the truth. Because Mom told everyone, "We're doing fine. Scott's business is going well. Madeline's just living independently in Chicago." They introduced Scott to friends as the founder of a fitness brand called Elevation Edge. A name I had to look up on Google only to find it had a website that ran for barely 3 months with no product updates, no reviews, no customers. Scott still told me he was negotiating with a new partner, about to start Series B funding, just needed a few more thousand to keep things afloat. The same words like a scratched record. And me, an ATM wired to them by blood, unable to cut the cord. One day during a short trip home, I stood just outside the living room while Uncle Robert, Mom's younger brother, came over for dinner. He asked, "So how's the family's finances?" And Scott, "How's his work going?" My mom, without hesitation, answered with pride, "Scott's been busy. He just wrapped up a collaboration with a software company in Boston. They're considering a long-term contract." I stood in the kitchen gripping my coffee mug. That Boston company? I had applied there last year. I knew they had no dealings with Scott. But I didn't step out. I didn't argue. I just washed dishes like always. I used to think maybe my mom lied out of pride, out of a bruised ego. But over time I understood. To her, the image of a brilliant entrepreneurial son mattered more than the truth, that her daughter was the one holding the household together. While I rented an aging apartment, drove a 7-year-old car and fixed stuck windows myself, Scott drove a new SUV, wore designer clothes, and told the family he was negotiating real estate investments. One Christmas dinner, Uncle Robert asked, "Madeline, have you heard about Scott's plan to buy land for a fitness center?" Before I could answer, Scott cut in, She's not too familiar, Uncle. She's good with numbers and finance. I'm more into the hands-on business side." Everyone laughed. I smiled along, silently spooning mashed potatoes onto Mom's plate. Every holiday I bought groceries, prepared meals, set the table, washed dishes. Scott showed up late with a cheap bottle of wine and was praised by my parents as the busiest one in the family. I often wondered, if I disappeared for a week, who would pay the utility bills? If I stopped for a month, would anyone even notice? I remember once, during a video call with Mom, she said, "Scott just took me out to a Japanese restaurant. He knows I love sashimi." I nodded and asked gently, "Where did he get the money to dine out, Mom?" She just chuckled, "Oh, he's resourceful. He knows how to make things work." I didn't remind her the credit card she used was being paid by me. I didn't ask how long Scott would last without my support. I didn't need their gratitude. But I longed for one thing: to be seen, to be acknowledged. But for 8 years all I received was silence, erasure, the feeling of being invisible in a life I was bankrolling. I used to believe maybe one day they'd realize. That Dad might call me his successful daughter. That Mom might hold my hand and say thank you. But when I heard things like, "Madeline has it so easy," or "she doesn't have to worry about anyone," said to my face, when I was the one worrying about everyone, I understood that recognition would never come. And I began to change, not with anger but with clarity. I recorded every expense, listed every cost I was covering. I needed to know precisely how much I was sacrificing in exchange for silence. And when that spreadsheet was complete, I sat in the dark, unable to speak. 8 years. Nearly $200,000. A house. Stable life. A family of my own I'd never dared to start, because I was too busy holding together one that didn't see me. I locked that spreadsheet in a safe, not to demand repayment but to remember. To see clearly how far I'd gone, and how much I'd lost trying to earn love the wrong way. And that night I finally allowed myself to ask something I'd never seriously considered before. If I stopped, what would really happen? Claire was the only one who had witnessed everything I'd gone through, from sophomore year of college to the moment I stepped into my 30s with fine lines around my eyes and a habit of waking up at 3 a.m. to check work emails. We met while working at the campus coffee shop. Claire majored in communications while I was juggling programming classes, data entry gigs, and late-night library shifts. She used to joke, "You study like you're on a global deadline." I didn't deny it, because sometimes I really believed that if I stopped trying, no one else would keep my life moving. We kept in touch after graduation even though life pulled us in different directions. Claire moved to Seattle to work at an ad agency and I stayed in Chicago. Friday nights were still ours. We'd video call, each with a glass of wine, trading stories about the week. Claire saw me pull all-nighters to finish financial reports while my mom texted, "Scott needs $1,500 urgently to close a deal." She couldn't hide her frustration. "Madeline, listen to me. You're not a bank. You don't owe them your life. You're being turned into a walking ATM nobody bothers to refuel." I gave a half smile. "Claire, they're my family. Family doesn't treat you like an unpaid temp." I didn't respond, because part of me still believed that if I was good enough, gave enough, maybe one day they'd notice me. Maybe they'd be grateful. The year my mom turned 60, I decided to do something special. I put aside $3,000, nearly my entire employee of the quarter bonus, to book a 3-day 2-night trip to New York for my parents. Midtown Hotel, Broadway musical tickets, a dinner reservation at the French restaurant my mom had once said she dreamed of trying. I planned everything down to the hour, even slipped a handwritten note in her purse saying, "I hope you can forget your worries for a while and just enjoy." I didn't call during their trip. I simply checked the credit card app quietly to make sure they were using the reservations I'd made. When they got home, I called to ask how it went. Mom said the weather was too cold and Dad wasn't used to walking. The theater was too crowded. She ended the story with a breezy, "But you know what? Scott called me while we were walking in Central Park. He sent me an e-card." It was so touching. I sat in silence, staring at my laptop screen. The report wasn't finished. It was almost 10 p.m. I had spent a month planning that trip, and all Scott had to do was make a 5-minute phone call. I didn't ask if she read the letter I wrote. I didn't mention the seared foie gras at Le Bernardin, the one she'd once raved about on a cooking show. I just hung up and went back to work. A few months later, my dad needed laparoscopic gallbladder surgery. It was routine, but he needed help during recovery. I took unpaid leave, flew back to Ohio, cooked every meal, organized his meds, took him to checkups, and pushed his wheelchair through hospital corridors at sunrise. One evening, while I was tidying his room, he said, "Why do you keep moving my pills around?" I got used to the old spot. What if I take the wrong ones? Scott wouldn't have made this kind of mess. I turned away, wiping the table slowly, not wanting him to see my eyes welling up. Scott was off vacationing at Lake Michigan with his new girlfriend. My parents knew. He posted pictures nonstop. No one asked how many meetings I'd canceled or how unpaid leave would impact my income. I told Claire when I got back to Chicago. She was quiet for a long time before gently asking, "Madeline, do you honestly believe they'll ever change?" I didn't know what to say. Some questions don't need logic. They need courage to admit the truth. I used to think that if I just kept going, I'd be acknowledged. But the more I gave, the further I drifted. They called Scott ambitious, a risk-taker, the future of the family. Me, the good cook, the dependable one, the mature older sister, who didn't need attention. Resentment didn't crash in like a storm. It dripped day by day like water wearing down stone. I once admired my own patience, until I realized it had become an excuse for others to take me for granted. One night after work, I got an email from Scott. "I'm launching a new AI-powered health app. Can you help fund the first phase? Just 10 grand. I already sent the proposal to Mom. She said to ask you." I froze. My mom hadn't called to ask how I was. But she forwarded a proposal to me like I was a venture capitalist. As if I wasn't her daughter, just the only remaining financial resource. And I asked myself, if I stopped giving, would they still call me family? Claire said I needed to stop. I knew she was right. But knowing and doing are two very different things, especially when what you're cutting off isn't just money, but the faint hope that someday you'll be enough. Enough to be loved. Enough to be remembered. Enough to be thanked. I couldn't sleep that night. The apartment was quiet, lit only by the hallway light bleeding through the door. I sat up, opened my laptop, and started building a spreadsheet. Not for another remittance, but to document, line by line, how much I'd spent, what I had endured, what I had lost in 8 years of silence. And in every cell I felt it more clearly than ever. I didn't want to live like this anymore. I had just received my year-end bonus, the biggest one in my 8 years of working. Seeing the amount in the confirmation email, I didn't feel the excitement my coworkers did. They were already making vacation plans and upgrading their phones. I just sat still, looking out the office window, the soft glow of late afternoon reflecting off the Chicago skyline. I had been planning to use that money as a down payment on a small apartment on the west side of the city. Somewhere quiet with good light and a little balcony for herbs and weekend reading. I had bookmarked over a dozen listings, compared interest rates, calculated every penny. I thought maybe finally I could save something just for me. But that very evening, while I was making a simple pasta dinner with white wine, my phone buzzed. It was Mom. "Madeline, can you host Thanksgiving this year? Our place is too cramped. Everyone's bumping elbows." She said it fast without asking if I was free or even willing, like it had already been decided. You've got that nice apartment. Big living room. And you're such a great cook. I gripped the pot handle. The smell of butter filled the kitchen and I suddenly felt short of breath. I took a long, slow breath in. Sure, Mom. I'll figure it out. Great. And don't forget the traditional turkey mashed potatoes like Grandma used to make. Keep it classic, okay? Scott says he wants the same flavors from childhood. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. For the next 3 days I ran back and forth between work and the grocery store. I wrote out ingredient lists, picked out a nearly 10-pound organic turkey, 3 kinds of cheese for baked macaroni the way Dad liked it, 2 bottles of French wine suggested by the store clerk. Something rich yet smooth so Mom wouldn't wrinkle her nose like always. I ordered a new beige tablecloth with white lace trim. A pre-made bouquet of dried wildflowers in autumn tones. The total cost was close to $1,000, not counting the hours I spent every evening drafting menus, testing recipes, and deep cleaning the apartment to fit nearly 10 guests. I even texted Scott to ask if he'd be bringing anything or if I should prep extra. Probably not, sis. I'm swamped. But I'll be there on time. Just prepping for my fitness app launch. Super busy. Thanks in advance. I stared at the message with its smiley face. No mention of food, help, or cost. Just a cheerful thanks in advance. I deleted the text. Then went back to testing the pumpkin pie recipe. 2 days before the holiday I got another call from Mom. I was polishing the silverware I only used for special occasions. Her voice was soft but I knew that tone. Whenever she spoke like that it meant I needed to prepare for a change in plans. I've been thinking, sweetheart, maybe we should just have dinner at home. Aunt Ellen said she hasn't seen the house in a long time, she misses the old kitchen. And your dad says he feels more comfortable staying here. Everywhere else feels strange. I turned to look at the fridge, stuffed with ingredients, containers, sauces. I had spent nearly 3 hours making the crust for a pecan pie, waiting only to bake it. I looked at the new tablecloth I had ordered, tags still hanging. Mom, I've already bought almost everything. Then just bring it all here. Your car's big enough, it'll be fine. Besides, eating at home makes everyone happier. The atmosphere is different. I gripped the phone tightly, bit my lip, and stayed quiet for a few seconds. I'll rearrange things. Yes, that's my good girl. And don't forget the roast, Scott loves that. After the call, I hung up and sat silently in the spotless apartment where I had strung fairy lights along the windows, printed the menu on craft paper and pinned it to the board. Every detail was chosen from old memories, hoping one year they would see me differently. I didn't tell anyone that when I put down the phone I cried. Not because the dinner was moved, but because I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I was always just the convenient option. They came when they needed me to prepare, they disappeared when I needed agreement, and then patted me on the shoulder with the same empty phrase, "You understand, right?" I wasn't angry at Mom, but I was exhausted. I didn't want to keep trying just to be seen as easygoing. I didn't want every holiday to feel like a test of endurance. I packed up the pie, divided food into plastic containers, grouped everything to make it easy to carry. I cleaned the kitchen as if I had never cooked, folded the tablecloth away, unplugged the string lights. The next morning I left home early, carrying 3 bags of ingredients, a thermos of cream mushroom sauce, and the unbaked pecan pie. Outside drizzle fell. The sky was gray and cold, but I still wore the camel coat I had bought last year and never used. I told myself maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. But deep down I already felt something slipping away. Something I couldn't name, like watching a candle burn down. Light still flickering but the draft of winter wind already seeping in through the cracks. And I wasn't sure I wanted to shield it anymore. I arrived at my parents' house at 8 a.m., arms full with a large box of food I had prepped the night before. The drizzle hadn't stopped, the air was damp and cold, soaking even through my thick sweater. Dad opened the door after my 3rd ring. No greeting, no question, just a glance at the heavy bags in my arms and a flat remark. "You're blocking the driveway. Scott's coming later, he needs to park close to the door." I nodded faintly, stepping inside, my feet touching the damp, cold tiles. In the kitchen, Mom was rinsing big platters, and on the stove was a pot of her traditional stuffing. "Good you're here," she said without looking at me. "I already started the pie filling. Your dad doesn't like new flavors, so I stuck with the old recipe." I set the bags on the counter and sighed. Inside was my stuffing, the one I had stayed up 2 nights perfecting, the dish Dad always said he missed most during the holidays. I smiled but said nothing. I spent nearly 4 hours arranging dishes in the oven, timing them carefully, setting the table exactly the way Mom wanted. The smell of roasted turkey filled the house, mingling with butter, cinnamon apples, and lemon zest. At one point, I glanced up and caught Mom watching me. Her eyes softened briefly, but then she turned away and called out, "Make sure the turkey doesn't dry out." Last year mine was more tender. At 1:30 p.m. the doorbell rang. Scott arrived, swaggering in with a new leather jacket, slicked back hair, and a grocery store bag in hand. I heard Dad's booming voice from the living room. "There he is. Our hero is here." Laughter followed. I wiped my hands, dabbed the sweat off my forehead, and walked out. Scott handed me the bag. "I bought pumpkin pie. Thought you might not have had time to make one, so I planned ahead." I looked at the cheap box, pale filling, cracked crust. I said nothing, setting it aside. In the oven, 3 of my pies were already golden, fragrant with ginger and maple syrup. Soon after, Aunt Ellen and Uncle Mark arrived with Natalie, my cousin. They brought a tray of soda and a pre-sliced pecan pie. Natalie hugged me tightly. "You made all this. Smells amazing. You're incredible." I smiled, thanked her, my eyes stinging. It was rare to hear words like that from family. We sat down to eat at 3 o'clock. I set out the dishes, poured the wine, and invited everyone to sit. I chose the end of the table for easy serving. Mom sat in the middle, Dad on her right, Scott on her left. I watched them chatter, none noticing my hands red from the oven heat since morning. Dad stood to say grace. "Lord, we give thanks for a safe year, for having Scott home with us, for families still together. We thank you for dreams taking shape. Amen." No mention of me, the one who had paid last month's utilities, internet, car bill, Dad's checkup. Dinner began. Everyone praised the stuffing. Mom's stuffing. She smiled and added, "The old recipe still works best." Wine poured. Scott raised his glass high. "Everyone toast to me. I'm about to launch my fitness app. Meeting my first investor next month." Aunt Ellen exclaimed, "Really? That's fantastic. You've got such a creative mind." I set down my glass. Mom turned to me. "Madeline, how's your company doing?" I was a little surprised she asked, but pleased. I replied, "I just completed a security platform for the Eastern financial system. It was a 6-month project, and the CEO sent me a personal thank you." Dad looked up, nodded, then said, "Scott's also about to sign with a sports equipment company in Dallas. That app has real potential. People love working out at home these days." I smiled lightly. Apps are plentiful, but to survive in this market takes a solid plan. Not to mention regulations, data security, and maintenance costs. Scott frowned and cut me off. "You talk like I don't know anything. I've done my research. Don't always look at everything through that skeptical lens. You've started 3 ventures already, Scott. Coffee, fitness equipment, even crypto. Do you know what went wrong in those?" Dad slammed his fork onto the table. "Madeline, just eat. Don't dissect your brother's work at the table. Siblings should support each other." I inhaled slowly. Aunt Ellen lowered her eyes. Natalie sipped her water, avoiding the tension. "I'm not dissecting. I'm pointing out what matters if you're planning to invest in Scott's new project. The last loan wasn't repaid either." "Did anyone force you to give money?" My father snapped. "You gave it yourself and now you want credit? Paying bills doesn't make you family. I don't need that hypocritical act." The room froze. No one moved. Only the faint clinking of silverware broke the silence. I looked straight at my father. His eyes were bloodshot, his shoulders trembling. He spoke through clenched teeth. "From now on, I don't have a daughter like you. Get out of this table." I set my napkin down. My hands were ice cold. I heard my mother sigh, but no one said a word. I rose, walked away from the table, my legs weightless. No one called after me. No one stopped me. I opened the door, cold air whipping my face. The sky was already dark. I stepped down the wet stone steps, my heels echoing against the ground. I didn't know how long I walked. Only that behind me the house glowed with lights, laughter spilling out again as if my absence left no trace. I don't remember exactly how I drove back to my apartment in Chicago. The highway was empty, rain drizzling. I let the wipers move on automatic, my only task to keep the wheel steady in its lane. Inside the car, the smell of pecan pie filling spilled onto the passenger seat clung to the air, making me nauseous. I walked into my apartment near 1 a.m. The place was silent, the soft yellow light in the kitchen still burning where I had left it. The tablecloth I had carefully chosen lay folded neatly, waiting for a dinner that never happened. I set my keys on the counter, took off my coat, went straight to the small office off the kitchen and opened my laptop. My hands were frozen, but they moved precisely. No tremor. No hesitation. Only the sound of keys striking in the still night, like the heartbeat of someone who had reached the edge of endurance. I opened the spreadsheet I had drafted weeks before. Columns: expense, payee, payment date, amount, status. Each row a silent record of years I had traded away to keep everything running. I reviewed every account, from banks, utilities to insurance. I began with the house in Ohio. The mortgage account holder was me. I logged into the bank, disabled automatic payments. A pop-up appeared. Are you sure you want to cancel recurring payments? I clicked yes. No hesitation. Next came the electric bill. Then water, gas, cable. Nearly everything in that house, the same house where my father had declared I was no longer his daughter, was under my name. They lived on the foundation I had built, spent on cards where I bore the legal responsibility. I drafted emails to each service provider. As of today, I am no longer responsible for payments on the account under Henry and Linda Green. Please direct billing to the actual account holders. I have removed my payment information and canceled all autopay features. For each service, I logged the time, saved a copy of the email, then marked complete in the spreadsheet. When I reached the car insurance, the very car my father drove daily, I paused longer. I remembered last month Mom calling saying the car needed urgent repairs, the bill too high, asking me to cover it. I had wired the money in under 10 minutes. Now I canceled everything and attached a copy of the insurance policy with instructions for them to resume payments. I moved on to the internet account, then to services they probably forgot they had. Netflix, Hulu, Spotify, Amazon Prime. All linked to my backup email, my payment cards born out of the days I thought, if they're happy, my exhaustion is worth it. I logged into the smart home system. After a break-in scare 3 years ago, I had installed door cameras, timed lighting, alarms, and remote monitoring, all under my credentials, all on my credit card. From the control panel, with a single click, I reset everything to default, cutting their devices off from my account. On the screen appeared, device reset. New user must log in to continue use. I stared at that line, a lump rising in my throat. Not regret, but the awareness that I had just severed the last thread tying me to that house, the place I had convinced myself was family. I opened an email, writing briefly without circling around, without blame. Dear Mom and Dad, after tonight's dinner, I understand clearly that my role in this family is no longer recognized. I respect your choice and will act accordingly. All financial matters I once managed for you, including mortgage, utilities, insurance, vehicles, and other services, have now been returned to their rightful owners. Contracts have been canceled or transferred properly. I am no longer legally or financially involved. Wishing you good health, Madeline. I read it 3 times. No additions, no deletions. No lengthy explanations. No reproach. I clicked send. When it was done, I leaned back in my chair. The room silent, no more typing, nothing left to manage. I pulled a thin blanket from the sofa, curled up still in my street clothes. My mind was blank, but a strange lightness filled me. As if for the first time in years, I had done something that belonged entirely to me. Not out of anger. Not as punishment. but because I knew if I didn't draw the line, I would forever stand behind, propping others up. And I decided, from that moment, I would no longer be a shadow. I would not step back again. I would let them live by their own means as I had by mine. And if they called it abandonment, maybe they had never known how long I had been standing behind them. I woke at 10 minutes to 7. No alarm. No dream. Just a rare deep sleep after months. I sat up, my back stiff from the sofa, the thin blanket still wrapped around my legs. Pale light filtered through the curtains, signaling a bleak November morning. I walked into the kitchen, brewed a cup of coffee, then switched my phone off silent. 36 missed calls. Over 50 texts. Voicemail full. I opened the texts first, my eyes still stinging from the sudden brightness. The first was from Scott, sent at 6:12 a.m. What the hell did you do? The car got towed this morning. I had an investor meeting. The next from Mom at 6:30 a.m. Madeline, call me right now. The alarm's been blaring since 5 a.m. We can't shut it off. Internet's down, the whole house is dark. A flood of other messages followed. Urgent, chaotic, each line another fracture discovered. I opened voicemail. My mother's voice came through, trembling and furious. What did you do with our accounts? The bank called saying there's no payment this month. They're threatening to repossess the house. The internet's down, the power shut off in the middle of the night. Your father woke up to sirens blaring. Do you want us to die of a heart attack? Call me back. I sipped my coffee, eyes fixed on the flood of new messages. Dad already called the police. The house was hacked. They're coming to investigate. If it's you, you should know you're breaking the law. I leaned against the fridge, letting the buzz of notifications pile up. 7:32. Another call came in. Incoming call. Parents home. I let it ring until it stopped. Then a voicemail from Natalie. I played it. Her voice was soft as if she was whispering, "Sis, are you okay? I don't know what's happening, but this morning when I went by Uncle Henry's house, I saw a tow truck hauling his car out of the garage. Police were there. He was in the yard yelling that the cameras had been hacked, the system crashed, and someone cut the remote controls. The whole neighborhood's talking. Are you involved? I'm not asking to judge, just to know you're safe." I slowly set my coffee down, opened my laptop, and logged into the remote surveillance system I'd once installed at my parents' house. Even though I had reset everything, old footage was still stored in the cloud, thanks to an auto backup feature I hadn't disabled. I pulled up the clip from 5:10 a.m. On screen appeared the front of the worn gray house. Motion lights flashing. Alarms blaring non-stop, neighbors peeking out their doors. My father, Henry, in a bathrobe and slippers, shouting into his phone, "We've been infiltrated. The whole system's down. Lights flickering, alarms won't stop, the car's gone." My mother stood in the yard, holding an iPad that could no longer connect. Her face pale. Scott sat on the steps, phone in hand, dialing frantically, but no one answered. Then a black tow truck backed into the driveway. The logo of Wellspring Vehicle Finance gleamed on the side. Two uniformed men stepped out, showed papers to my father, then began towing the SUV he drove every day. A neighbor, Mrs. Ruth, stood at the fence in her robe, tea mug in hand, staring. A boy rode past on his bike, twisting his neck to look. Sirens, voices, flashing lights turned that house into the spectacle of the block. I watched the scene without satisfaction. Only emptiness. A part of me had died the night before. The part that lived to please, to stand as the pillar of a home that never once called me by my true place. Not 10 minutes later, a police car arrived. A young officer stepped out, listened as my father raged about sabotage. When asked about the digital accounts, he reluctantly gave the email I had used 8 years ago to register the system. The officer quietly checked the devices. After seeing the bills under the name Madeline Green, he asked, "Do you have documentation proving ownership of this system?" My father nodded, went inside for the mortgage papers. But when the officer compared details, he said, "Mr. Henry, the house deed is yours, yes. But all digital security, cameras, internet, vehicles, they're registered and paid under Madeline Green." If she revoked access, that's not a crime. My father went silent. My mother stood by the door, lips pressed tight. Scott snapped. So you're taking her side? She's doing this for revenge. The officer replied, I'm not taking sides. I'm stating the regulations. This is a civil matter. If you want to pursue it, you'll need a lawyer. I closed the video, leaned back in my chair. My hands trembled, not from fear but from emotion. Not everyone understands that some battles take a lifetime to begin, and only one night to realize you don't need to fight anymore. I opened my email, reread the message I'd sent the night before. Every word was clear, legal, free of emotion. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a tantrum. It was the necessary ending to a journey I had dragged on too long just to be seen as family. A new message buzzed. It was Natalie, you did the right thing. I don't know what happened between you all, but I think it's time you lived by your own worth. If you need me, I'm here. I set my phone down, hugged a pillow, pressed my cheek to the cool fabric. Outside, the gray sky hadn't shifted, but inside, something softened. Amid the chaos, I had finally reclaimed the stillness I had lost long ago. My voicemail kept filling by the hour. Every missed call paired with another text, some a page long, others only a few words, but all with the same tone: blame, accusation, panic. Mom called nonstop, sometimes sobbing, sometimes hissing, "You're destroying this family. Do you want people to laugh at me? Are you really abandoning your parents?" At times her voice softened, almost pleading, "I know I made mistakes. But your father won't admit his. He's just angry. Please come back. We'll talk it through, don't escalate this." But minutes later, another message: "If you don't call, I'll contact a lawyer. Do you think canceling contracts is enough? You still owe your duty as a daughter." I read each line, my eyes cold. Those words no longer shook me. They were only echoes of a storm already past, loud but no longer pulling me under. Scott didn't bother with subtleties. He called 12 times in 2 hours. Then texted tirades: "Are you insane? Who gave you the right to cut off mom and dad's car? Do you know I needed it for my investor pitch? You're crazy. You've been the cancer of this family since childhood." I didn't answer. I didn't react. I no longer saw the need. Then came my father. He didn't call. Didn't text. He wrote an email, a long letter with the formal subject line: "Official statement on the immoral conduct of my daughter." In it, he cited every argument: family tradition, filial piety, blood ties, and insisted my actions were deliberate abandonment of parents, retaliatory in nature, signs of moral crime and violation of family foundation. I read to the end, where he wrote one short sentence: "You are no longer my child." I exhaled softly. Not angry. Not sad. I had heard those words before, at Thanksgiving dinner, when his hand still held a fork and his eyes locked onto mine. But this time I chose to send one reply, not for him but for the only person left in my family who still held reason. Uncle Robert, my mother's brother, a seasoned civil lawyer. I wrote briefly, attaching every contract under my name: electricity, water, internet, security system, vehicle insurance, holiday receipts, Scott's tuition transfers, Dad's hospital bills from last year, and bank statements dating back to 2016, the year I began quietly carrying the family's finances. At the end of the letter, I simply wrote, "I hope you can help confirm the legality of the decisions I've made. Thank you for always being the one to keep balance in this family." Not even an hour later, Uncle Robert called. His voice was steady as always, not rushed, not judgmental, only clear and reassuring. "I just finished reviewing everything. Madeline, you acted fully within the law. There is no statute that requires adult children to provide financial support to their parents without a clear agreement from both parties. Canceling contracts, transferring payments, or cutting system access is entirely legal." I stayed quiet on the line, a subtle wave of relief spreading through my chest. "I know you don't want this to turn into a battle," he continued, "but if they keep publicly defaming you or interfering with your work, I'll step in as your legal representative." I hadn't expected that. Uncle Robert had never taken sides in family conflicts. He always kept polite distance, warm to everyone, even when I was overlooked at gatherings. But today he chose not to stay silent. That evening, I received an email from someone I never imagined, Aunt Margaret, my mother's cousin who lived in Oregon. We had never been close, mostly seeing each other only at holidays. Madeline, I just heard from Robert. I had no idea you've carried all the family's expenses alone for years. Everyone thought Scott was the successful one and you were just the single daughter nobody talked about. I'm ashamed I ever believed that. You don't owe anyone in this family a thing. If you need a witness, I'll stand for you. Soon after, another aunt and uncle, Ed and Linda, wrote too. They apologized for once thinking I only cared about career and said, "At last, the truth is clear." I read each line slowly, my heart tightening. Not because of late praise, but because for the first time in years someone stood with me. Not because I complained, but because truth spoke for itself. I thought of Claire, my best friend who had always warned me I was being used. That night I called her, told her everything. She stayed quiet for a long time, then whispered, "You know what I admire most? Not that you left, but that you still kept your kindness when you pulled yourself out of the mud without dragging anyone down with you." I smiled faintly, said nothing more. I once believed I was the only daughter still holding on to the idea of home, the only one trying to keep family intact. But now I understood. No one has the right to keep you bound in a relationship that hurts you, not even parents, not even blood. And when I let go, I wasn't as alone as I thought. I moved into a new apartment on a soft, sunny afternoon, the breeze sweeping past balconies filled with green plants on the 12th floor. The place wasn't big, but enough for a desk by the window where light poured in every morning. I used the money I once sent to my parents to pay the deposit, furnish the rooms, and set aside the rest to start something I had never dared before. My own company. It was a small tech startup focused on software solutions supporting women entrepreneurs. An idea I had cherished for years but had always been smothered by words like unrealistic, women don't belong in tech, take care of your parents first, dream later. Now no one stood behind me telling me what to do with the money I earned. At first I had nothing more than an old laptop, a business plan drafted months earlier, and a list of potential clients I'd never dared to call. Day by day I reached out, emailed, learned new skills, coded line by line, even designed the logo myself. 3 months later I signed my first contract. The feeling wasn't loud. No fireworks. But when I wrote my name on that dotted line, I collapsed into my chair, crying in relief. For the first time I felt I truly belonged to my own life. Not as someone's daughter, but as an independent person with choices, ideals, and the right to stand on my own. Alongside building the company, I began therapy. My therapist, Rachel, a woman in her 50s with gentle eyes and a voice that didn't demand I be strong, listened as I shared slices of my childhood, family dinners where my name was never spoken, remarks that cut like hidden knives. Rachel didn't rush to diagnose. She simply listened. Then she introduced me to a support group for adults who had grown up in toxic families. There, I met people whose lives looked nothing like mine. A retired teacher whose children tried to take her house. A doctor whose mother controlled even the color of her work clothes. A 40-year-old man who had never once been asked at dinner, "How was your day?" We met weekly, no one needing to explain too much. Just speaking and everyone understood. No one was shamed for cutting ties. No one was judged for choosing themselves. Over that year I heard the change in my own voice. I no longer flinched at the sound of a phone ringing. I no longer cried at memories I had buried. I didn't need recognition anymore. I only needed to know I was living true to my worth. At a small workshop hosted by the group I met Ryan. He was a software engineer who had left a high-paying role as a CTO to open a repair shop and help seniors with technology. Ryan had calm brown eyes, a warm voice, and a way of talking that never made me feel like I had to earn points or prove value as I had before. We began by sharing cake after meetings, then ideas, late-night work sessions, quiet weekend walks without phones. No grand promises, no mind games. Just respect. Listening. Peace. While I rebuilt brick by brick, news from the old house still drifted back. Scott failed again. The fitness app he once swore would revolutionize the industry was pulled from the App Store for security flaws. Investors withdrew. By spring, he was working retail at a sporting goods store. I saw his picture in a clearance ad. Hair unkempt, confidence gone. My parents lost the house. The mortgage went unpaid. They moved into a smaller rental in the suburbs with no neighbors to boast to, no parties, no holiday dinners. None of them reached out to me again. I wasn't happy. I wasn't regretful. I just felt free. Because each of them now faced their own choices. I was no longer the shield hiding the truth from the world. One afternoon, Ryan and I sat by the window of my new apartment, watching cars crawl through quiet streets. He turned to me and asked, "Do you regret anything?" I looked into my steaming cup of tea, slowly shook my head. No. I don't regret a thing. Because I did everything I could, with kindness, with hope. And when no one returned it, I chose myself. I smiled not for anyone else but for me, the woman who had learned to step out of the place that once broke her. Now when someone asks me, "What is family?" I no longer answer with bloodlines. I say, family is not where your worth is taken but where you are seen and loved. And if they can't, you have the right to choose another. I chose. And I've never felt stronger. And what about you? If one day the very people who raised you turned away, denied every sacrifice and cast you aside like you never belonged, what would you do? Would you keep enduring or would you quietly stand up and redraw your own lines like I did? I don't think my story is unique. I believe countless others are carrying responsibilities they never agreed to, giving their youth to hold together a family that exists only on paper, only to receive silence, insults, or rejection in return. If that's you, I hope my story helps you see one thing clearly. You are not alone. You are not wrong for choosing to love yourself. And you absolutely have the right to rewrite the definition of family in a way that lets you live whole and at peace. I would love to hear your thoughts after listening to this story. Leave a comment below. Even a short line could be the support someone else needs while struggling through their own invisible fractures. And if you find these stories worth hearing, hit subscribe. Because ahead are many more true stories about kinship, hurt, and the ways we rise from brokenness to find ourselves again. Thank you for listening to mine.